how you set up right from the beginning for your bi-wings.
Here's one right here, and so forth. You've got to use some other means of making sure that everything is square. I use a jig to make a biplane and make sure the wings are all lined up properly. It's a good thing to take the model out and check it and see how well it corresponds to the drawing that you have. Pretty well in line. And the one thing that I'm looking for is configuration of the wings to the fuselage. Now, in some cases, the drawing may show the struts and so forth a little longer than what the model is, or maybe it's a little shorter than what the model is, and I try to readjust the model to the drawings that I'm using to make a jig. First thing I set up is draw a baseline. It's a pontoon model, so I can draw my baseline along here. And one way to get the baseline nice and even, I can say that this line is a good baseline here, and I want to come down to a baseline underneath the pontoon. So I'll take this distance here to here with dividers, move it out here, move it out there, and draw my baseline along here for the model. Now the next thing I have to do, make a jig for the wings deal. So here in case I'm putting a ruler along the baseline. Now I'm going to draw some vertical lines. I'm going to draw a vertical line here, the front end of the pontoon, and now I'm going to draw a vertical line at the leading edge of the wings. In this case, the wings are the same size and they're one on top of the other, so I just have two basic lines here going up for the wings. And then I have to get the spacing between the wings is taken usually from the leading edge to the leading edge up here, and that's the spacing that I want this piece to be right here. This is my piece is going to be for spacing between the wings. However, I can't take this distance from here to here to make the jig piece. I have to go to the front view and extend this distance from here to here a little bit more, because the wing spacer is going to go out here and you got a dihedral. So you have to account for the dihedral. This spacing here is going to be the same as this spacing here, regardless of where it falls. Basically now sets up the spacing for the wings. This section right here will be made up as part of the bottom of the base, and those are shown here on a card. Marking the forward, and I do them this way and then shadow image this way, because that way when I set them down on my jig, I have lines on the outside to align them. So that's the bottom one. Now this this is the top one that gives my spacing between my bottom wing and my top wing. So this I use is basically just cardstock, and I like to use this because it has a little thickness and it's a little bit reinforcing. This I will then cut out and paste onto balsa wood, but balsa wood tends to be rather soft. Now I tend to use basswood because it's stiffer and holds up better. The other thing is that I generally take the basswood strip and just hit it with any kind of a primer, a spray can primer, so that when I use the white glue, it doesn't warp the piece too much. If you put it on bare wood with the white glue, why it's liable to warp it. So that's laid out on a piece of strip, running the grain running on the wood this way. And the reason for that is that I want as much strength this way. I'm not as concerned about the strength this way because I'm going to reinforce the back of these pieces with another little piece of wood. In this case, it's very fine plywood, but you could use 32nd inch, any type of wood across here, the grain, to keep this from possibly splitting out. And you don't really worry too much. You can't reinforce down all the way down here because that's going to interfere with sliding in the jig. So that's the two prime pieces that I'm talking about in making this. Then we go to actually making the basic jig board. The jig board is basically made out of almost 1/8, I guess, foam core. But I usually take 2 pieces of foam core, put them together with glue, and I lay them on the kitchen counter, which is nice and flat, and put a stack of books on it.
Do you have a glue preference for
I just use the
laminate?
Aleen's glue.
Okay.
Aleen's glue is basically what I do. Put it on the kitchen counter, which is nice and flat, and put a whole stack of books on it. And that will give you then a good rigid base. If you just use one thickness or a thicker piece of foam core, it still sometimes has a little bit of a curl to it.
Right.
This way you don't have any curl to it. I'll take the foam core and I'll take my measurements. I'll take about an inch longer than the model this way, and about an inch longer than the model this way. And take 2 pieces of foam core square, pound them together, and glue it down. Once it's glued down and dried, then I have to lay out the jig. So I take a center line here, and then, as you can see here, I've taken pretty much just an arbitrary center line in the wing.
Right.
It doesn't matter really just where it is. And that center line then is this line here. And this line here is the front of the leading edge of the wing, and this is the trailing edge of the wing. I'll take a measurement from here to here to make sure that I get this back off the edge of the base, and then use the dividers. Again, I'm a great one for dividers. The dividers, and come out here, and come out here, and then I can get parallel lines to put my jig together. In this case, we had pontoons on it, and so we had to make 2 little pontoon boxes, and those were made by just taking dimensions off the drawing, and that dimension there, basically the front dimension here, this lays flat. This piece right in here basically gives you the elevation of the pontoon. I've cut down on either side here to allow myself plenty of room to put the attachments and so forth on. And the box was just a tad too long, so I had to put a spacer in the back. That's what that spacer is in the back. Sets those up. I mean, from the center line and so forth, you can very easily set up those to put them in. I also make templates for the wing, and the template for the wing, as you can see here, comes over here and up and around like so. I cut out a spot for these pontoons out here because I'm going to turn the model upside down and put those on freehand. I'm not going to try to use a mold for those. But I had a problem with taking care of the wing in the center section, so I had to build the center section. So when I set it up, that will align the wings and so forth with the fuselage. Unfortunately, because this fuselage is so warped, it doesn't work. I mean, I've got to put it together. It won't stay together. I had this together last night, and it was nice and tight, but even the tape won't hold it together.
Will you be getting rid of the warp?
Well, I'm going to have to. I'll probably have to put in some hot water and try to flatten it out. Yeah.
I was wondering how you're going to do it.
Yeah. So that sets it up now. So when I build it then, I'm putting in this section here, which is the front section, and I'm cutting a slot here for the top wing template. And I usually try to put that usually in the middle of a bay, as it is right here. This is glued down. This is glued down. These are what I call pin blocks, and I'll tell you why they're pin blocks, but they're little balsa pin blocks. They also help to locate the top wing, which fits in there like that. Place it in the middle of a bay because there's the least interference with any struts, because it will be out of the way once I'm going to rig it. So now the model is set up and all set to put the top wing on. Now, this top wing is in 3 sections and it's taped together so it's not completely proper. But one thing I do with most of these airplanes is, how are you going to maintain this distance here between the top wing and the bottom wing with something that's flimsy and floppy? So I have to make a straight back, or a strong back. And strong back basically is a piece of wood. It conforms to the dihedral. And then I put another little piece of wood underneath it so it has something to set on the wing so it won't tip. That basically keeps it from tipping. And then strap it down, and now that wing is surprisingly stiff. When you put that on there, it's basically going to maintain the distance between the wings. How do I keep this all together? The one thing I like to do with this, that's shown with this little jig, is I use sewing elastic. This is 1/8 and is probably too thin to use on anything but the smallest of aircraft. But the advantage to using sewing elastic as opposed to rubber bands or something like that is that you can establish just the amount of strength that you need to hold that wing on and then pin it. And that's why we have the pin blocks. As you can see, I take this and just establish just enough elasticity on there to hold it down. It's just enough to hold it down. Plus the fact that rubber band sometimes can mar a finish, whereas this is a cloth finish on this kind of tape. So it really is good on finished models. But you have one for the top and one for the bottom. I didn't put the bottom one back in again. As you can see over here, one for the top, one for the bottom. That holds everything together. Now you're all set to put the wing struts in. You go ahead and you put all your struts in there, and everything is pretty well solid up and everything. Now, want to rig it, you take this out, take the rubber tapes off, take this out, take these off, and now you put the model back. The top wing would be on it like that, but you wouldn't have anything interfering in here. Now the advantage of this is that you can turn this every which way you want to work on it without always ever having to touch the model all the time. And if you're like I am, you're constantly handling the model. This way you don't have to handle the model. Or hand the model very little. You can do all your rigging and so forth in here. You can put these struts in here for the pontoons and so forth, and do any rigging back here and touch the model a minimum amount of times with your hands. The other thing is I usually start this out as a square, and then once I have the model on, I trim these corners. And the only reason that they're trimmed is to
get them out of the way.
A little more room to get in to do the work. This is an N3N, which is a type of trainer that was built by the Navy, the Philadelphia Navy Yard prior to and during World War II. It sort of competed with the Stearman for a basic trainer. And if you're interested, there is an excellent example of this out at the Yanks Museum in Chino. And this is a case where the model just has a single pontoon. Small models like this, I find that it's easier to actually assemble the bottom wing on half of the fuselage before you put the fuselage together. Now, I can do all the work inside and maybe my insert and so forth, get it all set, but I don't want to put anything in there that extends beyond the center line of the fuselage at this particular time. I will put the fuselage down, half the fuselage down, tape it down so it doesn't slide around, and now I've made a dihedral guide. Here's the center of the fuselage and here's the dihedral. See if I can hold this thing together. I'm putting that down there, and now I'm gluing it down with this as a guide until it dries. I can turn it over and do the same thing on the other side. And now I have the proper dihedral for both wings. And when it goes and fits in here, it will fit according to the dihedral that's in the mold. If you have a model, like many of the newer models, plastic models, they have tongues on attaching parts that fit in slits and they line themselves perfectly. But you get some of these models, like these are resin, they're beautifully cast, but they don't have good attachment points, and there's not much surface there to attach it. And although there are a couple little holes and a couple little nubs on there, I may actually take the nubs off and put little pieces of wire in there. But when you go to put it on there and to get the right dihedral, by doing it on the flat sway, it works such that you get a good dihedral. If you're doing that, if you're using that same deal for a model that has a lot of locating tits along the mating surface, then just take a piece of 1/16 inch balsa wood or a couple little strips and put your model down on that. It will elevate it so that the tits don't destroy the flatness of the fuselage. This gauge here doesn't matter how far up the wing is from the fuselage. The angle is here, and that angle is going to set the angle for your thing. Tape the fuselage down. You can even tape this down, actually, before you glue it. And then just glue it and tape it to the other side. It's one of those things that you know, a lot of younger models probably don't have to do and maybe think it's too much, but when you get to the age that I am with disabilities and infirmities and so forth, sometimes you just have to go a little slower and find ways around problems.